with the Finance Committee. Councillor Green, I'm joined by Councillor Hogan, Councillor Carney, who's the chair of the Public Works Committee, Councillor Allen. Go through for anyone else. I don't think so. Oh, Councillor White, I see as well. So I think we can just open it up, and I'll let the administration kind of lay out the plan as to why we'd like to purchase these vehicles.
Thank you, Councillor Green. We have a presentation, so I'm going to share my screen, and Brad is going to talk through the beginning. But I'll go really quickly through the first slide, I guess. From the beginning. Can everybody see the presentation? Okay, somebody.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about the approach for the CIP process, a little bit about the cost of borrowing and the basic debt stats for the city. We'll give a summary of the whole city's plan over the 6-year period of the plan. We'll give the summary of the upcoming year, which is the most important year in the plan, since it's the closest to happening. And then we're going to, since this is joint, to talk about really the Packer request that's in front of you at the moment. We're going to go over the DPW summary 6-year plan really quick, a summary of the 2022 DPW request, look at the detail of the 2022 fleet requests, and then look at the backup for the Packers. Sound reasonable? With that, Brad, you can jump in and walk through.
Okay, thanks. So, you know, this Packer request is part of a much larger CIP plan. And what we did this year was a little bit different than what we've done in the past. We took more of a need-based approach. And what that means is we looked at each project to determine if they were individually needed. And that resulted in some cases of adding projects that we wouldn't have in the past, and in some cases delaying projects that we would have taken on annually. After assessing the projects individually, we looked at how we could bond for these projects. In the past, we've tried to set a bond threshold that was level set from year to year, or at least pretty close from year to year. That's a good starting point, but we wanted to look at it a couple of different ways to see if that was the right number. So we're looking at 3 things when we're considering what to borrow. The first is what the markets believe we can safely borrow. This is something we looked at with our bond consultant. To say, if we're borrowing 15 million, do the markets think that's right? You know, in some cases, the markets are going to tell us that we should be borrowing because it's the right thing to do for the city. But at a certain level, the markets are going to tell us this is now risky. So we're working with the bond counsel to find that number. What he preliminarily is telling us is that we could really borrow about twice as much as we're currently borrowing before the markets started to hesitate. The next layer we looked at is what we think we can fiscally responsibly borrow. You know, we don't think the right answer is doubling our borrowing. That's probably not something we can afford. So you know, the first ceiling of what the market would allow, we're going to reduce that by what we think we can responsibly borrow, including interest. And you know, in the environment we're in now, interest is much lower than it has been in the past. So you know, what last year, you know, $15 borrowing could cost us the same as a 17, 18, $20 million borrowing this year because of the reduced interest. Another thing that we're looking at for each of these projects is a long-term financial benefit of the project. There are some projects that will add revenues, some that will decrease expenses. You know, something like it's not a bonded project, but our human capital management, payroll, timekeeping systems. Those are things that will decrease expenses in the past, and those are calculations that we're going to factor into each of these projects to determine if they are fiscally responsible project to take on. So, as I mentioned, the rates are low now, so which is really what sparked this inquiry of what should we be borrowing. It's probably not the same as it was last year because the interest rates are low. So to give you some context of how low the interest rates are now, our recent revenue anticipation note that we borrow each year, we closed in November, and the rate on that is about a quarter of what it was the previous year. That's going to save us about $400,000. So we think now is the time to go through this in-depth analysis and just take a different look at what is the responsible level to borrow.
So to start all this process, talking with our bond counsel, we just went over some of our basic debt information. So this is our debt limit use over time. So it just shows how in 1990 we were using 57% of our debt limit, then it went to 67%, 70%, 77%. And since 2005, we've really gone down. So down to 53, 45, and now we're down to 33, and you can see that here. So here we are using about a third of our debt limit. Just to compare that to, other cities. This is the same measure. So here we are at about a third of our debt limit, and it shows us compared to all the other upstate cities. So we're not the highest, we're not the lowest. We're just kind of in the realm of where the other cities are.
Sorry, Tim, which what are the colors? I can't see.
Sorry, this blue one is the same. So this measure, this is Syracuse over time. So it shows how we were really using a much larger percentage of our overall debt limit 15 years ago and how we've steadily gone down. And then this measure here, this is going to carry forward to, I'm sorry that the things are small, but this is the same measure. So this is us using a third. This is Rochester, a little higher, Yonkers, roughly the same, Albany, about the same. Schenectady's way higher, Buffalo's lower. Gotcha. And then we have some other measures, which is like debt as a percentage of our full valuation of property. So here's Syracuse, and it just shows us Rochester's a little lower, Yonkers is higher, Albany's a little lower, Buffalo's lower, Schenectady's higher. Then this is just debt per capita, so debt per person in the city. So Syracuse has about $1,000 of debt for every person in the city. Rochester has a little more, Yonkers has a lot more, Albany's a little more, Schenectady's more, Buffalo's a little lower. So that's just the context. That's sort of like what we were thinking about in the beginning when we're trying to inform how the level that we want to spend.
And all of these are just additional points of data. When we determine internally what we think is prudent to borrow, this is just other metrics that we can measure that against, just to make sure we're not missing something.
So this is really a summary of the whole plan. So the plan covers 6 years, and it covers the whole city. So you see the general fund departments here. So as a whole, combined, it's $288 million over the 6 years. Here, this shows the breakout of cash capital, borrowed, and other, which is usually reimbursed funds. It's all a plan, so everything is really can change. It doesn't get formally approved. This is our attempt to be planning smartly and signaling what we try to do, but things can change. And in the end, all the items that we end up borrowing for spending come before the council when we're actually doing it. So that's really when you sign off, which is part of this meeting is we're asking to sign off on the Packer request for DPW. So this is like the bigger context of our plan that we just finished at the end of the year. But then of the 288 million, 218 million is in the general fund. And you can see the distribution of cash, 26 million, borrowed 103 million, and other 88 million. Really, I'm going to go from there to the 2022, the first year, which is probably the most important part because it's the upcoming year. Same thing, so it's 50, almost 60 million across everything. 6 million is the school district. Then you've got the water fund and the sewer fund. And then you've got the total general fund, which is mostly 6 departments. So in particular for this meeting, we're looking at public works. So their 22 plan has almost 18 million worth, $1 million in cash capital, 12.6 in borrowed, and 4.2 of other. Is there any question on this before I jump to the projects for DPW?
Tim, can I ask you a couple questions?
Ask Mike. Yeah.
Mike, I'm sorry. I forget who's running the meeting.
Counselor Green.
Counselor Green.
Go ahead, Mr. Reiser.
Thank you. So on the slide that you said about borrowing going down, were there fewer projects in those years that we were declining requested because something had changed? So that was one question. And then the second question was on when you do the city comparisons and the method of financing slide shows you the slides that you presented. Are we comparing apples to apples in each city? Like you just showed, the school district had $6 million. So Yonkers has been in a different situation relative to their borrowing needs, et cetera. So are we really comparing apples to apples and when we're looking at these cities?
I'll take the second question first. So I do believe we're apples to apples because this is literally the stuff from our bond consultant. So this is how the rating agencies and everybody look at us. And so I think yes on that. On why it went down, I don't have a perfect explanation. I do think the idea that we issued debt in relation to what we retire pays down debt over time. And so our debt went down relative to the total. And I think the idea is that's responsible, and that's why we're in a position where we could borrow more now. I mean, this also probably resulted in some deferred maintenance and stuff like that in order to not do it. So
okay, thanks, that's helpful to understand your slides.
Any other questions before I jump into the DPW summary?
I'm curious to that remark about deferred maintenance because it feels like a lot of the stuff we've done lately has been in response to deferred maintenance. You know what I mean? Like it seems like we've just gotten, in the last 2-3 years, we've heard about, large investments in snowplows, large investments in this, that, and the other. Am I missing something there, or where?
No, I think you're saying it right and hearing it right. But some things are new investments that we think we should do because they're smart and oriented toward growth, and some things are things that we just haven't done in a timely manner, and now we have to overcome some of deferred maintenance. I think the Packer request, certainly the comment of deferred maintenance is relevant and part of the reason why we're asking to buy 6.
Tim, could you go back to that cash capital deal? Cash capital with okay. So, I mean, the determination for what we spend as far as per department for the cash capital, and how that relates to our annual budget presentation. But we do you want to buy, obviously, you said vehicles out of cash capital, correct? It's not smart bonding for vehicles. I mean, it's all predicated on what's needed by the department, right? more or less? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. I'm not sure if Brad, you want to jump in or you want me to?
I just wonder how you what your thinking is behind that, Brad.
Well, one thing I would add first is I would just say, so we did make targets based on for each department that we gave them in making their plan, but we also told each department not to inherently constrain themselves to the target, but to ask for what they think they need, because we want to at least know what they should have instead of just deferring maintenance without like a knowledge that they should be buying stuff.
I guess I'm wondering that tactically, what do you decide that you're going to use cash for, and what do you decide you're going to use borrow for per department? How do you do that?
Yeah, so this is project by project, and really what we don't want to do is sign the city up for a long-term bill for an asset that's only going to benefit us for a couple of years. So things like computers, cars, those are things that typically, police cars will last 3 or 4 years. We don't want to be paying for a car that we got rid of 6 years ago. So those are the kinds of things that we would put in cash capital rather than bond for.
And so that's all predicated on the needs of the particular department. So, okay, I got it.
So if you look at police, we're not talking about police, but police, most of their requests is vehicles, which don't last forever because they use them a lot. And then they also have a bunch of IT requests. And IT is also one of these things that how long it lasts is, I think both Brad and I agree that we're going to think intentionally about what things are cash and not, so that we're doing it thoughtfully. But I wouldn't say this distribution is, I mean, we looked at each project and made a quick judgment on where it could go, but we probably have to evaluate that with a more thoughtful, consistent policy.
That thoughtful stuff's important, Tim. God bless you.
So, Councilor Green, if I may again, so when you talk about the getting the Packers, isn't that a part of a bigger question in terms of long-term for the city? I know there's been studies to talk about privatizing our trash.
Okay. So hang on, we'll pause and then we'll go, because I think that'll be the last and most consuming item. So let's just quickly.
Okay.
So this is the DPW plan over the entire 6-year period. I'm really not gonna harp too much on the overall. It's got 18 projects. It's 96 million over the whole period, 18 million in the first year. One thing that we tried to do is for things that are recurring, we tried to make sure they recur instead of like being an item in the first year and then being zeros in the out years. In general, we tried to make sure there's money in the future when it's something that's recurring. This is the summary for DPW for the first year, and it gives the breakdown of borrowed and cash and other. And in particular, I would flag the vehicle and equipment line, which is 2 million. And that's where the Packers are and their overall requests. So I would just show, I'm just gonna keep going and then we can come back to this stuff if the end when we have time. But so the vehicle request for 22, which is that 2 million that we're saying, 1 million in cash capital, 1 million in borrowed, basically. Really, it's the borrowed is the Packers, because they're the thing that is gonna last. It's the most expensive and the thing that's gonna last the longest. But this is the whole equipment request for the year. But then again, the thing in front of you right now is the Packers, which we need to order. We're trying to order now so that they're ready for the next year. Which this other stuff, for the most part, I don't think anything else would be coming before the council before the start of the new fiscal year, except for maybe some type of bucket truck related to replacing lights. And then this just gives, I have the Packer inventory here. So, okay, with that, I think we can open it up to the Packer discussion, and the DPW folks can jump in to also talk about the plan. I will say that in the beginning with the Packer stuff, we did an analysis that just showed the thing about the trucks is that we get a big discount. So we buy $196,000 trucks for $165,000. So when we did this analysis that showed essentially we could lower our cost per truck year if we were using trucks for 5 years and then selling them while they still have some value, and then minimizing our maintenance request, our maintenance budget. So the maintenance costs are low in the beginning, the maintenance costs get bigger in the out years, we get a big discount. As a result, it kind of feeds this idea that we should buy new, use for 5 years, sell before we've destroyed the truck. And that's cheaper in terms of having a truck for a year on average. So that also feeds into this idea of let's buy 6 now, because the 6 are very old. The oldest 6 are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they're all at least 13 years old.
So I have a lot of questions, but I'll open it up to the other counselors first if anyone wants to jump in and start. Okay. So I guess my big thing is I think I can look at this fleet from a fleet management perspective. If our goal is to keep using Packers, okay, it makes sense to buy more. But what I have a problem with is, going back to the beginning of what we use capital for, it's either to bring in revenue or reduce expenses. And when you look at the way we do trash, when we have a lot of manpower and 2 different vehicles, one for recycling and one for trash, and we have a lot of injuries because we don't have automatic arms on any of this stuff, and it's not clear to me that investing in Packers reduces expenses. It seems like it increases expenses because we're not using automation and we're not using ways to make things cheaper. So I just don't, I can understand that right now in front of us, we're saying, well, we don't know what the plan is going forward, so we just want to keep things going. But we've all been here for 4 years now. And to me, it seems like the time has come to say, hey, we're going to look at the way we do trash differently. And I have concerns about investing another $1 million into the same status quo, particularly in light of the fact that in our last meeting, we were talking about, how we're never going to be able to do automatic arms because we have power lines in Syracuse, and we're never going to be able to, cycle out recycling and trash in the same truck, even though private companies do that now. So I guess that's just kind of my philosophical concern. And that's, I think we need to have a larger discussion about the future of how we do sanitation and whether or not kind of doubling down on this equipment is the right approach.
I think characterizing this as a status quo purchase is not accurate. These vehicles that we're purchasing, we've made sure the vehicle specifications are such that we can make them semi-automated if that's the direction that we go in. This is about the immediate need, but also with a mind to the future. So whatever the outcome of the sanitation study is, if it is semi-automation, we've purchased these vehicles that are flexible enough to meet that need. If, by some chance, outsourcing ends up being the direction that the council wants to go in with sanitation, that's going to take years to negotiate. We can't just lay off all of sanitation. It's clearly outlined in the local 400 contract. So that's going to take some time to negotiate what that outcome is going to look like if that's the direction the council wants to go in. So
let's be clear, Corey, that's certainly not the direction I want to go in. I'm not in any way interested in privatizing, public works, but at the same time, I have the same concern about spending. It seems like a bit of information that is certainly going to take time for me to thoroughly digest and make an informed decision.
Yeah, and I hope that the memo that Jeremy provided is helpful. I mean, as the graph demonstrates, we've spent $193,000 in repairs on a vehicle that we purchased for $108,000. We've spent $180,000 on a vehicle in repairs on a vehicle we spent $130,000 in. We hired a director of fleet operations to help us make these types of informed decisions and to use his expertise to help guide how do we keep services going without any disruption, what are the best decisions that we need to make with regard to our fleet? We need to get to a point where, similar to the school district and other municipalities, we're purchasing these vehicles and cycling them out and not driving them into the ground, which historically has been our approach. So this decision was not made completely absent of the reality that we're entering into a sanitation study. We, as Jeremy's memo pointed out, we've looked into if for some reason we do need to offload these vehicles in 2 or 3 years, the resale value is there and oftentimes is equal, if not more, of what we're able to buy it for because we buy it at such a discounted price. The flexibility is there if we do need to convert these trucks to meet whatever the outcome of the sanitation study is. So, this was not done completely regardless of what the outcome of the sanitation study might be. And I don't believe it's a status quo purchase. It's a purchase with a mind to what's going to come in the next 2 years with regard to the sanitation study, the completion of it, and then the implementation, but also with a mind to we need to continue sanitation services without disruption. And based on, Rich DeVesti and his knowledge of these vehicles, there is a very good chance that we're not going to be able to do that when we have these vehicles that are 15, 17 years old or whatever it is that we're driving around. We need to invest in our fleet in order to make sure that services remain disrupted. It's very similar to the snowplow conversation that we had last year. This is a case of deferred maintenance. We went 7 years where we only bought 2 vehicles. You can't have an operating fleet with decisions like that. And so, we're unfortunately in a position where we need to make up for it for what, some might characterize a mistake. I certainly understand the financial constraints that resulted in only purchasing 2 vehicles over 7 years, but that put us in a bind, and that's where we're at right now. And so I don't believe this is a status quo purchase. This is trying to maintain services as they are now, but with an eye to what's going to happen down the road and what the possible outcomes are for the sanitation study.
Thanks, Corey.
Councilor Green, if I could,
can I just do one question, Councilor? So I guess just responding to that, why not have a couple of the vehicles already be rather than the opportunity to retrofit them, why don't we test out on 1 or 2 routes that don't have power lines, whether or not automation works? And that way there's data that we have for the study.
I mean, I agree that I think saying sanitation, semi-automation or full automation is never going to work in the city. That's why we've hired this consultant, is to guide those positions. So rather than investing in my understanding is that, including some changes that we tried to make in the last few years with regard to sanitation services, that we all had agreed that it was best to keep the services as they are right now and await the outcome of the sanitation study before we start trying new things or changing who we pick up trash for or the way in which our trucks operate. That the point was to let's stay the course, work with this consultant, get a sanitation study, and then have a very thoughtful, strategic implementation of whatever it is the changes are that we decide. I don't know that trying out new arms on sanitation trucks is really going to give us any information. If that's what the consultant suggests we do, then we're completely open to doing that. But it was my understanding that the idea from the council was let's stay the course, let's keep things as they are long enough for us to do the sanitation study, and then let's be strategic in the changes that we want to make in terms of our operation.
Councilor Green. I'm sorry.
To Corey's point, I think we're talking about 2 parallel paths here. I mean, obviously, what Tim and Brad have laid out for us is a financial vehicle that seems like, not to use financial vehicle, but it's certainly fiduciarily responsible, is to borrow for this equipment. And if we need it, it's a lot like what Corey said as far as the snowplow situation. I want to make sure we're taken care of immediately and for the next 2 years. The other thing, as far as this survey and everything else, as far as, whether we privatize, which I'd be totally against myself, like Councilor Jay would, that's something that is an analysis or a survey we'll probably get about the same time we'll get rezone, or whenever maybe 5 years from now, I'll end up at St. Mary's Cemetery and we'll still end up looking for rezone. But so, if we do this analysis, I would assume that this would be an evaluation that would be based not on us try to jerry rig some portable arms and a couple Packers. I mean, we're not talking that, are we, Corey?
Well, I mean, you know, like
I mean, that doesn't seem like that would be sort of an efficient way of doing things.
I mean, if we're changing our approach, you know, then that's a conversation to have. It was my understanding that, you know, let's continue delivering the services as we do now, which will require new Packers. But let's wait until we have the outcome of the sanitation study before we start making any changes, experimental or not, to our sanitation operation.
I mean, it's cheap to borrow money now, and let's, you know, to me, I think this is a responsible way to address this problems.
Councilor Green, I'd like to point something out. If you're going to continue, as Corey says, the way you do things now, which is sending out Packers as recycling trucks and Packers as trash trucks, these 6 purchases, you should consider buying 2 of them as recycling because they're subject to a 50% grant. And you should pay cash for the 2 for recycling because you can't get the grant unless the item is paid for. So you should probably buy 2 recycling ones, pay cash, get the grant, 50% grant that you're eligible for recycling, and then borrow the ones that are for trash because you're eligible for that grant only if you have paid for them, or you can't get it until you pay for it.
We did have that conversation as part of this request, and it seemed as though that the recycling trucks are more recent and they have to stay recycling trucks for a certain period of time, so we can't just move them and buy new ones at the rate. So these are really buying trash trucks. This is the way it was explained to me.
So just to respond a little bit, Corey, like we did definitely talk about changing trash pickups for apartments, and I was very vocal that I didn't want to change that part of it, and that's totally true. And I also said that I also said that we should do a study of how we do trash and we should look at that. I personally don't ever remember saying that we shouldn't change anything until that study came back, but obviously I can't speak for the entire council, but that's not my position. I think if there's a way to innovate prior to that study, that we should be open to that. So I just wanted to clarify that part of it.
Yeah, I'm open to that. You know, I just think even that is a separate conversation, I think, from the fact that we need these Packers. If we want to put arms on these new Packers and try them out to try out some automation, I'm open to doing that if we can do it in a way that makes sense. But either way, in order to keep going with and have our sanitation operation not disrupted, we need new Packers. But yeah, I'm completely open to trying new things, you know, on a parallel track to the sanitation study or at the advice of the consultant before it's completed, trying new things. I'm completely open to it. But to me, I think that's a somewhat parallel conversation to the fact that we have Packers that are so old that we're putting more money, we're just throwing money away as we put more and more money into them.
So, sorry, Councilor Bay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's all right, Councilor Green, because this was going to be a bit of a cheap shot, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time. Maybe the Packers is why all the trash is leaking back onto the street. I mean, investing in the truck, you know, certainly has its value, but it have even more value if the trash actually goes into the truck. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Well, and hopefully, you know, one of the things we'll explore in the study is, you know, whether or not we provide residents with carts that would make, you know, that might make trash collection a lot cleaner and have less stuff flying out in all directions. So I don't take that as a cheap shot. I accept that. That's true.
So another question I had is, in our initial committee meeting, there was discussion that if we ever lost enough Packers that was less than the amount of routes we had, that it would be, you know, health and safety violations, so we'd be able to pick up, you know, enough trash and be an issue for that. But then I guess the question is, if that came up, would we consider going to 2 shifts? And which brings into the next question here is, should we be considering weighing 2 shifts now as opposed to the cost of buying the new trucks? And what's the analysis of those things? And I've heard people say, well, we'd have to have the garage open longer, which I understand that, but what is the cost of that versus the cost of buying the new truck?
Yeah, and we can certainly cost out the shift. I think as Jeremy addressed in his memo, part of the issue is that if we don't have enough trucks for staff, then, you know, then we would have 2 separate 8-hour shifts. There wouldn't be any overlap because we wouldn't have enough trucks for that staff. And which means 2 8-hour shifts means that we're picking up, I don't know what the timing would look like, but, we're picking trash up starting at 4 o'clock in the morning and go until 10 o'clock at night. And I think there's certainly a safety concern, not only for our own employees who face challenges in the daytime with their safety picking up trash, but also to residents and their property that is, picking up trash at night when it's dark out, really makes sense in the short term. I agree with you, Councilor Green. Like in the long term, this should be something that we look at as part of the sanitation study. We should look at our shifts and whether or not they make sense. Should they be staggered? Is there a different way that we could organize our shifts? I'm fully on board for that. But I think in the short term, we face the challenge with, the timing of when those shifts would be. In the short term, if we're going to run our packers, the ones that we have left, twice as long as we do now, then we're sort of digging ourselves even deeper into that hole and accelerating the depreciation of the vehicles that we currently have, the ones that we do have remaining that aren't, 13 years old. And one of the other challenges, which again is not insurmountable, and again, in the long term, this is what we should be looking at, is the when Okra's facilities are open. Right now, to my knowledge, and I know Dareth is on here, I believe it's available from 7 to 4 for the unloading of trucks, which means multiple trucks, the full trucks would be left overnight and not able to feed first thing in the morning. So in the short term, again, that's not insurmountable, but in the short term, I'm not sure how we navigate that. In the long term, we should be looking at shifts. Obviously Okra is going to be a key partner in this sanitation study as we explore what we should be doing. But I think as a short-term alternative to buying new packers, I don't think that the shift conversation is going to make sense in the next year, but it should be part of the broader conversation about sanitation. I mean, we can certainly put some figures to it, but I think there's also just logistical challenges that we face I can't necessarily put a price to the property damage that we might cause if we're driving, more hours in the dark. We could take the property damage that we do now and multiply that, or, how we would navigate the Okra conversation. But again, as a long-term thing, we should absolutely be looking at it. I just don't know if it makes sense short-term.
Wait, don't our guys start now before the sun rises? I don't really see why it's different if
there's, an hour and a half as opposed to 6 hours in the dark. I think is, certainly we pick up in the dark now. There's probably a lot less traffic out on the roads at 6 o'clock in the morning than there would be at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night, which, if we go further into the night, that's what we would face. I'm not, again, it's not totally insurmountable. It's just, there is a cost to that as well. I don't want to say it's a guarantee, but it is a very strong likelihood that we will continue to do more property damage. And there's also just a concern about safety, which is something I want to address in the sanitation study. Safety is a major concern of our sanitation workers. How can we make the sanitation operation safer? Maybe it's by semi-automation so that people aren't jumping in and out of trucks. Maybe that would make it safer. Again, if we're doing automation, maybe it makes sense to pick up further into the night because people aren't jumping in and out of trucks the whole time. It absolutely is a valid thing to explore long term. I just don't think that it's a reasonable alternative to packers in the short term.
Are there questions from other councilors? Before I hog everything.
I just want to mention it would certainly be pretty interesting up on Tipperary Hill when everybody's jumping from odd to even if we're picking up trash at night. That's for sure. Logistically, it might be a little bit of a interesting exercise in certain neighborhoods.
Which is why you could do Tip Hill in the morning and do,
Yeah, I mean,
you could switch it around. Well, as long as Tip Hill stays in the morning, I'm okay with it.
These are absolutely conversations that we should be having as part of the study. I mean, I'm not saying, we should never be picking up trash in the dark. I'm just saying our operation as it currently exists, we're going to face some serious concerns picking up, for 6 or 7 hours in the dark. That's all in the short term. That's all I'm saying. We could change the way that we pick up trash and make it absolutely, without any additional safety concerns doing it in the dark. I just don't think it's an alternative to what we're talking about today.
Councilor Green, I don't know if it's changed. I know it's been like another lifetime since I was Deputy Commissioner of Public Works, but The reality is we have a incentive program for the shift that's on there now, unless it's changed, where they get to go when all the crews return after 6 hours, even though they're paid for an 8-hour day. Have we looked at whether or not we should expand that? I realize it's an incentive. It's to try to get the guys off the road, less injuries, less trouble. But we really are working on an incentive system now. Isn't that correct, Corey?
Yeah, I believe so. Jeremy and Ann can speak to that, but I believe that is the case. And again, this is something that this sanitation study that we're doing is a soup to nuts from, shifts and work and workers' comp and injuries and safety and fleet maintenance and, the communication that we give to our residents and what our residents use and the weight of what we ask people to put out and how do we deal with illegal setouts and what do we do with tires and special pickups. I mean, it is a comprehensive study. And so I agree, we should be looking, this will be part of the conversation, the incentive program, the incentive that we basically have for folks to try and finish early. Is that the best way to do it? Or should we be looking at a different way to structure the shifts? I agree, it should be on the table and it will be.
Corey, the data that we have, do we feel like the consultants are going to have enough to make kind of these operational decisions, and how comfortable are we that they are going to be able to give us the recommendation?
I mean, it's absolutely going to be a challenge. Like a lot of operations in the city, we don't have all the data that we would want at our fingertips. I think, I'm sure Ann Fordock's on here. I'm sure she's going to be spending a good amount of time trying to collect data and crunching numbers. We'll be working with the budget office to try and get as much data as we can. I think that's why it's great we have Rich on board, because Rich has really been incorporating more and more data into our fleet management program. So it's absolutely going to be a challenge. That's also in part why we, although there were arguments on the other side, why we also went with a local consultant who will be able to actually be on the ground following the trucks and can actually meet with folks to see it happening firsthand. But I mean, data is a challenge, everywhere in the city. So it's certainly going to be an issue, but I don't think it's going to be insurmountable. I mean, I think in the conversations we've had and Ann has had with them, we've been pretty explicit in a lot of the challenges that we have in terms of accurate data collection.
So, I mean, I obviously really support the consultant study. I think it's needed, but I also think it sometimes feels like it's this way of delaying maybe changes that are easier that we could look at. And to me, I think we don't know whether or not having 2 shifts is better than buying more trucks, but it seems something we could figure out on our own, right? It doesn't seem insurmountable to say, let's run the labor costs of doing that, and then knowing that before we make this decision. I mean, is that something we can do?
Yeah, I think it's just that I can't imagine that accelerating the depreciation of the Packers that we have now in the next year is the right move. I can't, I don't know how we would address the Okra issue, but, certainly we could have a conversation with Dareth about that. I continue to have concerns given that automation is not part of our operation, that having people hop in and off of trucks at 8:00 at night while people are, driving down James Street is an issue. So, I mean, I don't know that now is the time to start experimenting when that's why we hired this consultant, was to help us be strategic in implementing the changes that we want to make. I mean, happy to try new things, but I think it was my understanding that's why we hired the consultant, was to help us be strategic in the changes that we make, not to just try kind of one-off pilots and without their involvement and not at their direction. If they want us to try different pilot things to gather additional data, I think it makes sense. I don't know that doing the sanitation study on a parallel track, we should be kind of introducing pilot programs just to see how things might work out separate from the work that they're doing.
I understand that, but I mean, it's a big ask to say, let's spend $1 million in a difficult financial climate, to say we're going to invest a lot. And, it is, maybe you don't like the word status quo, but we're buying the trucks we already have now, right? It's an investment in the fleet that we have now. And I think to at least look at whether or not that is the best thing to do in terms of comparing it to the shifts, like I would feel more comfortable making that decision if we knew that It's the best way to do it.
I mean, you can refer to it as status quo. I think it's not disrupting the services that we're currently providing to residents. I think we've made the case that we have an eye to the future, and that we didn't just, well, what did we buy last time and let's just buy those. That we're strategic in the number that we're asking for. We're strategic in the type of vehicles that we're requesting. So I don't, if status quo is not interrupting services for residents, then I guess this is status quo. But I think we absolutely are mindful of the sanitation study and what those outcomes might be, and made this purchase with our eyes wide open that there are some uncertainties out there that might change in the next year or two. It's the alternative to not buying the new Packers, I think, is a bigger risk. And, Tim and Brad have made the case in terms of our financial capability. So, similar to the snowplows last year, this is an issue of deferred maintenance in our fleet, and these are the types of steps that we need to be taking in order to get a functioning fleet management program operating in the city.
And I agree. I mean, look, I love the snowplow purchase, but I think a big distinction here is we do trash differently than every other municipality around us, right? Like, we don't do snowplowing differently. Like, so that was very clearly the right investment. It's less clear here, right? Because there are other ways of doing it. So that's just my.
Well, I mean, the council could have said last year, instead of buying new snowplows, why don't we just outsource all of our snowplowing to in our residential areas? That's how some municipalities do it. That's not how we do it. And we thought that making the investment in our snowplows was the right decision. And I still think that's it. I mean, if you talk to a lot of the snow and ice staff, they are immensely grateful to the council for approving the purchase of the new snowplows. It's been a real game changer for the operation. And I think it's a very similar position that we're in right now with sanitation, that we, and again, we did this mindful of the sanitation study. We scaled back the ask. Initially, we came to Tim with 10. We talked about the outcomes of the sanitation study and said, let's scale it back to 6, because, who knows what the sanitation study is going to result in. We said to Rich, if by some reason in the next 2 or 3 years we need to offload these Packers, is there a market for them? And Rich has said, and can provide links. I provided them to Councilor Paniagua yesterday, links of exactly what these Packers go for. And we're confident that if by some reason we need to sell them, there's a definite market for them, particularly at the discounted price that we get them. And again, the vehicle specifications for this equipment allows us to introduce automation or semi-automation if that ends up being the direction that we go in. It's just, we don't want to interrupt services for the residents over the next year or two. I mean, anything that we do, whether it's introducing carts or automation, it's not going to be done by the end of this calendar year in all likelihood. And so in order to not interrupt service for the next year, 12 to 18 months, as we implement whatever it is that the sanitation study says, we need these Packers. And, we just, again, appreciate the council's support last year with the snowplows, and Jeremy can attest to what a game changer it was. And it's a very similar situation that we're in right now.
Other questions from councilors?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Corey, do we know what the likelihood of there being an interruption in services would be if we were not to approve these purchases?
I mean, if you just judge by, Jeremy can probably speak to this, but if you judge just by some of the disruptions that we've had in terms of leaving recycling at people's houses, for until the next day, we're going to be facing that type of situation with trash, because we just won't have enough trucks to pick up the trash on the day that it's supposed to be picked up, which means trash is just going to be sitting at the curb for another day until we're able to get to it. I mean, I'm not trying to, shout fire or any type of panic. It's just, we wouldn't be asking for these if we didn't think we needed them just to maintain services uninterrupted for residents.
Corey, I think that's kind of the concern because, and I'm not suggesting that it hasn't been discussed, but to my knowledge, it hasn't really been in any detail with us discussed. You would think that this determination could have been made, for example, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, a year ago. And so it just, and then, I'm not saying that's the intent, but we kind of always get this dire straits kind of, so you can understand our skepticism anytime we're it's going to fall apart by tomorrow.
We'll have no choice but to make it work somehow It just will mean increased overtime costs for keeping our sanitation crews on Saturday. It will likely mean upset residents whose trash wasn't picked up on the day that they put it out there, and so it's been sitting at the curb for an extra day. You know, the city's not going to burn, but there will be. We are confident, and it's not just me. It's Jeremy, it's Ann, it's Rich DeVesti, it's Tim. We're confident that there will be consequences if, there will be outcomes if we don't purchase these new Packers. I'm not trying to shout fire. I'm not, yelling a public health crisis or anything like that. It's just trash left at the curb and significantly increased overtime costs for having to have crews come in on Saturdays to pick up trash that we didn't get to do during the week.
That's understandable, Corey. Hey, Rudd, so just a question, and I have to look over it again just in case I miss it. Has there been, to Corey's point, has there been any kind of comparison, at least to demonstrate, what our potential losses could be? Let's say if we're slow on replacing trucks. Obviously, it makes more sense to purchase new if the cost of repairs is starting to exceed the initial value of the truck. That goes without saying, I think. But when we talk about, even, as Corey mentioned, trash being picked up the next day, it's kind of already happening in some respects. And even, the potential overtime costs that she mentioned. I mean, has there been any consideration of cost comparison between, the cost for new trucks and the equity we get out of that versus the cost she's referring to?
So we haven't looked at the staffing implications of not having trucks in any financial way, but there was this financial model which is not super presentable, but it has a bunch of assumptions around like how much can we purchase a truck for versus its initial value, and then how much interest do we pay, what's the typical maintenance cost by year, and what's the typical depreciation. And it basically it takes this thing where it says, look, here's our fleet. Here's the cost of maintaining our fleet if we don't buy any new ones. Here's the cost of maintaining our fleet if we get rid of the trucks after 5 years every year. So we'd have to buy new. And it just kind of does. It basically says that when you look at the cost per truck year, this shows the cost per year of a truck. And you can see how it gets higher the more you hold on to a truck. So if you're buying and having low maintenance costs the first 5 years, your cost per truck year is like lower, and then it gets higher after year 5, in part because the vehicle depreciates more, it's not worth as much, and at the same time the maintenance cost goes up. So we really targeted this 5-year window. That was really the justification for it, that we just thought the optimum time period for Packers is every 5 years. And we did not do any kind of financial analysis on what the impact, the alternatives of like that Councilor Green was describing with like double 2 shifts and all of that.
Yeah, understood. I think I was just listening to what Corey was saying, which I think was a valid argument, but it would be a tough thing to sell if we reach the expiration that let's say the suggested 5 years that we would use a truck before we would put it out the pasture, put it out for sale, and the cost for the truck will still outweigh that projected what's assumed to be labor costs if we didn't purchase right away, or if we didn't if we didn't purchase right away. So I guess I would be interested. I don't know how much of a headache that is, Mr. Director, but I just would be interested, just for our information, to see what that difference could be. Maybe that adds to the selling point, but I would think if there's an argument made about the potential cost for maintenance, which is valid, potential increased cost for overtime, which is valid, and even delayed services equally valid. If that argument is made, then we should be able to demonstrate what losses we would have versus purchase new, and the difference in cost. Does that make sense? You, Rudd. Yeah.
I think so. I mean, I think I get it. I think that the analysis that's done just says like given the way we operate, it makes sense to rotate trucks in and out every 5 years, and that has no measure of like. I think inherent to that is you're getting a higher quality truck because you're only going to have a truck that's 0 to 5 years old.
Right.
And so I gave no value to that operational gain of that like reliability, but that's there. I mean, and then so that I think that would only make it better given the status, given the current operation. And then from there, I don't know what kind of changes would change the assumptions. Because like if we're going to, I think Corey's point of if we use the trucks twice as much each day, that's probably going to accelerate the depreciation schedule, which is going to like change some of this current payback. But so once you start moving different parts, I think it gets harder to say. But I think given the nature of our current operation, it seems we should be financially, it makes sense to buy new trucks every 5 years, and it would only make the operation better because we would have newer trucks.
And that's kind of the point I'm getting to, you know, and understand my position. If the argument is made about the potential expenses for not purchasing versus the benefit of purchasing, I think that would have to be demonstrated. Not to make your argument for you, I think ultimately what you just communicated to me, which is what I was thinking, is that I would think that the cost for the truck would still outpace the cost that Corey described, but maybe the difference is made up in the equity. You know, maybe the difference is made up in the fact that we have efficient services. You know, Corey, I'm crack my joke again. Let's make sure the trash get in the truck. That's not your responsibility, though, Corey. But you know, maybe it's made up there. You know, but I think if that argument is made, we have to be able to demonstrate as much, just from our perspective. You know, so that we can make an informed decision. Otherwise, you can't make the argument.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably do something to estimate some kind of gain of having better trucks.
I'm sure there is one, but I just would like to see it just for my information if possible. Thank you, Mr. Director.
Okay. So we're coming up to the end of this meeting. So assuming there's no other questions, we will close this meeting. And then at 12 o'clock, I think it's the same link, we'll be on for the Public Safety Finance Committee. The interruption.
It's not the same link.
It is or is not?
It is not.
Oh, all right. Well, we'll switch over then. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Jim, could you send out the link again? Because as I mentioned, we received so many links, I couldn't tell the difference.